Welcome to today's edition of the IntoTexas AI podcast. It's your look at AI news and trends impacting Texas. I'm your host, Shannon Belew. Let's get started. Today, we're driving home one of the most visible and sometimes controversial applications of AI hitting Texas roads right now: autonomous vehicles. And starting May 28th, of this year, 2026, Texas is about to flip a switch that could either accelerate or potentially start putting the brakes on the entire industry. My money is on the continued growth, the regulatory inflection point. So, what is changing? Well, there are new rules from the Texas Department of Motor Vehicles that any company operating commercial autonomous vehicles in Texas must obtain formal state authorization. And this stems from the new automated vehicle authorization requirements, or Senate Bill 2807, which was actually passed in September of last year. And those requirements are becoming fully enforceable now at the end of May. So here's what it actually means. Essentially, companies must prove their vehicles comply with Texas traffic laws. They need liability coverage or self-insurance, and they must include data recording systems. And I think almost most importantly is that they must submit first responder interaction plans. This means that the companies, the applicant, must certify that the Texas Department of Public Safety has been provided a copy of a plan that specifies how firefighters, police, ambulances, EMTs, medical professionals, any other emergency services. It's the plan of how they should interact with the automated motor vehicle during the provision of these services, and that's as required by the Texas Transportation Code. Plan submissions can be made through the DPS website, and as you can apply for the certification. Also, to note, there are no fees that come with this, and no fees required to operate automated vehicles. Also, the authorizations, once given, do not expire. They're essentially valid until they're revoked and that's by the department. And an authorization holder is also required to update the department of any material changes to the information that was provided at the time of original application, and that has to be done within 30 days of the change. So, this isn't just paperwork. The state truly now has the power to suspend or revoke operations if a system is deemed unsafe, which is a good thing. Now, one more critical point. This does apply, again, specifically to commercial operations, those robotaxis or autonomous vehicles that offer rideshare, delivery fleets, logistics. It's not your personal vehicle. So this is really about the business of autonomy. Why Texas matters? Well, Texas is, as usual, uniquely positioned in this space and is considered an actual leader in the deployment of autonomous vehicles. And it's, we've done a lot here already. Much of it's been based in Austin. And so it's become very important for these companies to be able to not only test, but then again, actually put into the market these active vehicles. And keep in mind, this isn't the first piece of legislation for autonomous vehicles. For that, we have to actually go back to 2017 when the state first amended the Texas Transportation Code just to include policies for autonomous vehicles. And then another law was passed in 2021. So the differentiator for Texas with all of these laws is that unlike most other states so far anyway, that have more fragmented local rules, Texas has always taken a statewide approach. And that prevents cities from creating their own regulations for autonomous vehicles. In theory, I would say, this creates something that companies should really appreciate, and that's predictability at scale, and not to mention, again, the continued ability to test and quickly deploy. Well, the state has certainly seen the positive impact of this thus far. In fact, according to the city of Austin, They already have 6 self-driving car companies that are operating in some format in the city. This is based on a report from local news, Spectrum News, and they've specified 3 companies. So you've got ADMT, AvRide, which is integrated with the Uber app and heavily financially backed by Uber as well. And then you have Zoox, which is owned by Amazon. So these 3 companies are still in what's called the testing phase. Then there's one company that remains in the mapping phase. So they're mapping the streets and roadways. And then you've got finally 2 companies that are already deployed, and this is Austin-based Tesla as well as Waymo. In 2023, Austin city officials noted that there were just over 100 autonomous vehicles that were being tested or deployed in the market. Now, compare that to data that I could find today, which shows that there are more than 100 vehicles from Waymo alone. So you can see just in a few short years, we've had substantial growth, even in just that one city. Now, that does bring us to what about the rest of the state? Well, Houston and Dallas have been a little bit slower to experience these autonomous rideshare cars, but that's really changed this year. Waymo and AV or AvRide, not sure, the proper way to say it, so forgive me if I'm saying it incorrectly, but both of them are now based in Dallas. And actually, as of this week, Tesla also announced the expansion of its fully unsupervised, human unsupervised robotaxi to both Dallas and Houston, though they're limited in scope. And I think I was looking at Dallas specifically, and the range of the area where they service is really small right now. And then I think they were expecting less, four cars or less in the market, but they're here. So Texas is truly, it's been and it's continuing to be a real world proving ground for autonomous vehicles. Why? Well, look, we have diverse road conditions. We have typically good weather, definitely not extreme weather like lots of snow and things like that. So it's good, steady conditions to test in. You have rapid population growth, major urban city centers, as we talked about with Dallas and Houston, and of course, Austin. And then so far, you've had a regulatory environment that is super friendly to these companies and definitely lean pro innovation. So you ask, is that balance going to shift with these new regulations? Well, first, let's look at some of these companies that are shaping the market today. First, Waymo. They're probably the most mature operator in the US with millions of miles logged and a strong safety narrative. They report, significantly fewer serious crashes than human drivers in their data. And I'll go kind of off script for a moment for a personal story that happened just this weekend and say, I got to see that Waymo safety approach philosophy firsthand when I was out walking my dog and had a car that turned out to be a Waymo come up behind me, and it wouldn't go around. The passenger in the back, poor guy, he finally rolls down his window to apologize and says, he can't get the car to move. Well, I thought it was just trying to go around me and wouldn't because, I'm in its way. So trying to get further and further out of the path, whatever it's defined as the safe path for passing. And eventually, it went on its way, delivered the driver. Turned out that was where they were stopping anyway. It just wasn't at the exact spot where it was programmed to stop for letting the passenger out. But again, it's a great reminder of how important and how critical safety is. I mean, we as humans have to deal with this all the time, but you take the human out of that for these autonomous vehicles, there's just a lot of different types of things that happen in an environment when you're driving that you have to respond to. And by the way, speaking of safety, if you're wondering why I was walking my dog in the street, it's because in this particular area there are no sidewalks, but it's heavy with pedestrian traffic and lots of dogs, so it's very common. And again, this is back to the point I just was trying to make, which is whether you're a human driver or driverless car, you've got to be able to react to unexpected conditions. And I will say again, this is one of the things that Waymo is truly hailed for its safety because it uses a combination of cameras and then sensor technology and to really inform it of its entire surroundings. Then you can compare that to Tesla's robotaxis, which have been, criticized somewhat for using only cameras and AI, of course, but it's a vision only approach that's supposed to mimic the human driving experience. Now, keep in mind, they're using 8 to 10 cameras, so it's not like you've got just one single point of view. But still, it could be a really big difference. Well, then let's also talk about Zoox, which is owned by Amazon. It's another really interesting story and a different type of rideshare experience. And I think it's just in, I want to say Las Vegas right now, and just coming to Austin in the process, Miami. So slowly coming to markets, but I think just a maximum of 4 at the moment, doing that from memory. But it's kind of billed as this truly purpose-built autonomous vehicle with no steering wheel, no pedals. It's designed entirely around autonomy from day one and really focused on the comfort of the passenger. Zoox touts the ability for their passengers to fully control music and temperature from their own seat, which is a super comfortable, allegedly, carriage seat with lots of legroom. And it also offers, networking and charging options. And it just, again, is creating an experience for the passenger. And that's its whole positioning. If you haven't seen one, I'd describe it as kind of a mini version of a European rail car meets the American party bus. It's an interesting combination. So we'll see how it evolves and how it does in the markets as it rolls out. But look, all of these driverless rideshare vehicles just represent one segment of the overall autonomous vehicle industry. Look, autonomy in Texas, it is not just robotaxis. It is definitely also about logistics, delivery, and supply chains. The delivery and freight opportunity. Let's talk about this. So, Texas is a logistics powerhouse, ports, highways, distribution hubs. So, autonomous delivery and trucking could have an even bigger economic impact than passenger rideshare vehicles. Think about autonomous long haul trucking between Dallas and Houston, last mile delivery robots in suburban neighborhoods, and AI managed fleets optimizing routes in real time. So companies are already testing and proving success with freight routes across Texas corridors, especially you look at North Texas along corridor through Dallas. And there are, I think, 4 companies today with commercial autonomous freight services on U.S. public roads. So not just Texas, but across the U.S. And this is according to Fleet Rabbit. But these companies include Aurora Innovation. It launched in spring of last year and is known for its long haul routes. Then you have Kodiak, which services the middle mile. And for middle mile, think of that as the delivery of goods for big retailers like Walmart. And, by the way, it just launched its driverless delivery vehicles in January of this year, 2026, and has already raised or accumulated over $600 million in contracted revenue. That's just incredible. Then you have Kodiak AI, which was actually founded in 2018. So it's been around a good while longer. It's considered to have the largest fleet of self-operating Class 8 vehicles. And it even went public late last year. They also are, I think, in the process of doing some driverless fleets for military purposes as well. So it's expanded beyond just commercial applications. And it is based in California, but they have a key operations center located in Lancaster, Texas. Then the other one, you've got Waymo, back to that again. Now, they do not operate a fleet of delivery trucks. Instead, what they've chosen to do is to license their autonomous driving system to truck manufacturers and logistics partners. Well, when it comes to the value proposition for commercial trucking, I think it seems pretty clear. You're looking at the benefits of much lower labor cost, 24/7 operation, reduced delivery times, and hopefully increased safety. And while many of these leading companies are based elsewhere, as I mentioned before, they either have key locations in Texas or they're truly dependent upon Texas roadways to test and deliver these real world results. But the industry as a whole, it could contribute to substantial long-term economic growth. I've seen reports with projected national impacts of $70 billion in GDP contribution and as much as $9 billion in consumer savings annually. And that's all estimated by 2035. So, next 10 years or less now. And that's according to, multiple sources. Now, Texas would get a big slice of that economic boom. There's no doubt about that. You do have to also consider, though, that the same economics that make this attractive, it does also raise other issues and concerns, especially when you think about the workforce. So, in a state like Texas, where trucking and logistics are major employers, it's like most everything else when we look at how AI is impacting companies and workforce and people, right? What jobs are lost because of this, or what jobs evolve? Again, we at IntoTexas talk a lot about the role that you might have today. Maybe it goes away, but it expands or changes into a new type of role. And so same thing with, this industry when you talk about trucking and logistics. Some jobs are likely to go away, but that could open the doors for some new types of roles. So we'll just have to watch that. But it's, again, all something that is part of the overall economic equation when we talk about AI and its impact. But now there's another debate. And let's go back to the new changes coming from the DMV as part of this regulatory program that goes into effect, or compliance, and goes into effect at the end of May. But let's talk about, could this slow things down at all for the overall industry and for Texas? Well, there's one concern that's been raised, and that's around safety. Now, I'm not talking about the literal safety of passengers and other related traffic issues and driving conditions, but it's related to how do you safely not just enact these regulations, but how do you keep them up to date in an industry that's just constantly changing? And this is something that the researchers, or a group of researchers at the University of Texas in Austin, have brought up, and they see it as a flaw in this new regulation. And again, what their argument is that you can't treat autonomous vehicles and the safety of them as a one-time certification, right? You don't just check the box once and it's done, because these systems, they're brand new. Again, as we've talked about today, most of them are still in the process of being tested and making adjustments. And these vehicles and the AI that's literally driving them is going to continue to evolve. They learn, the systems learned, and then they change over time. So that creates a regulatory challenge. Well, how do you certify, something that is constantly being updated? Well, the researchers at, the university, which they specialize in this, they do a lot of great work here. They do have some ideas, and they would like to see regulations that essentially learn and evolve too. So we'll have to see how that plays out. But I think it's, it's a legitimate question. And you've got to consider too, as part of this regulation, individuals, drivers, pedestrians, they can log complaints, and then the company has to respond to those. And again, they could lose their authorization to operate if the department deems that they've failed in their responsibility to operate in a safe manner. So it's got big consequences all the way around, and we're going to continue to learn. The industry is new, as you have seen and heard today. So we're going to continue to learn. But I think for now, the Texas's new framework tries to address this as much as possible. Again, it's giving regulators ongoing oversight, and it's really not just a one-time approval. But look, the real test, it does start at the end of the month, end of May. So let's see what happens. Speaking of what happens next, what should we be watching for the impact of this? Well, first, I'm just curious, who gets approved? And even more so than that, is there anyone who doesn't get approved? Again, there's some key consistent major players across both the rideshare portion and the commercial delivery portion of the industry. So do we see some kind of edge players that haven't really been known yet that pop up as part of this? Maybe. But again, just curious to see, does anyone not get approved? And then second, I think we look to see how fast companies continue to scale. So do the robotaxis and the delivery vehicles continue their pace of rapid growth in Texas? Or does this start to make them hit some regulatory friction that slows them down? We'll see. And then finally, it always comes back to public trust, right? Because adoption doesn't happen without it. And we're talking about shared roadways where we all have to exist. And so we do need that public trust. And it'll be interesting to see what types of responses we get, if any. But I think as these vehicles start to expand into more communities, that's when the rubber hits the road, right? Literally and figuratively, to see what happens. So story is, autonomous vehicles aren't coming, they are here. And in Texas, this next phase won't be defined just by technology alone. It'll truly be defined by how regulation, safety, technology, and the business models come together. All right, that's it for today. As always, thanks for listening to the IntoTexas AI podcast. If you want to continue getting further insights into how AI is reshaping Texas, then I invite you to continue listening, sharing, and of course, please subscribe. I'm Shannon Belew, and I'll see you next time.